going to talk to us about what her job is when she comes and sees plays and writes about them.
When I left America to cover theater in New York in 1980, the most shocking thing was to look down the seats on the aisle in the theaters and realize that they were all men, that all of my colleagues in New York were men. I was a critic in Chicago at the Chicago Tribune for 11 years, completely spoiled and got a totally distorted idea of what parody was in journalism and in criticism. And I believe it was because originally that there was a woman, a critic in Chicago named Claudia Cassidy, who reviewed music and theater and dance and reviewed it every single day and replaced herself every night in the Tribune. And people would buy that paper. When I was growing up, they would buy the paper to read Claudia. They would hate her, they would love her. She discovered Glass Menagerie. In every Tennessee Williams book, he says, if she didn't come and write about it and write about it and write about it until the Broadway producers had to come to Chicago to see this play, she's pretty much forgotten now. If she were a man, there would be theaters named after her. But Claudia was taught Chicago readers that women could have strong voices, and people just saw her out. And after that, there just was a tradition in Chicago of strong women voices. And I was used to it, and I thought that's the way life was. And I moved to New York, and I was stunned. It was pathetic, but I thought, well, this is just some transition period. I'm sure I missed the women, and they'll be here tomorrow, and that was 1980. And I would go to the Drama Critics Circle meetings, and I was, until very recently, the only first-string theater critic of newspapers and magazines in New York since 1980. Now that is pathetic, right? It shouldn't matter, but it does, and we'll talk about why it matters. But I'm like the mascot there. The old boys, you don't want to really give the award to Will Rogers' Follies. And here's the reasons why, and then of course they would. Anyway, but there are now, I believe, 4 of us in the Drama Critics Circle, and one of them, 2 are actually first-string critics, so there were 5. That's great. And USA Today has Alyssa Gardner, and she's a first-string theater critic. And after Clive Barnes died at the Post, they hired Elizabeth Vincent. I can do this honestly, I know her name. Elizabeth Vincentini, Vincentelli, I'm so sorry, who started a year ago. And we talk about being a voting bloc now, and it's still, there are times now when I pick up the papers, because I still get 5 papers delivered to my door every morning. And I pick them up and I'd say, okay, what did they say this morning? And every once in a while, there would be this real pleasure that it's not just the cheese stands alone. Elizabeth was there, and actually someone else saw something that I also saw. Now, it doesn't always mean that we only see things through our gender. That's ridiculous, and I'm not saying that. But I'll tell you that the number of times that I go to plays in New York that are about men, by men, with possibly a female character who's usually the mother of the son, or some very, very outrageous woman who actually could be played by a man. And, that this is actually the characters that are being celebrated in the theater. And I go to plays that are new women's voices and old women's voices, and I pick up the papers and I find out that my colleagues, you know, we're all friends, it's all good. But I would pick it up and they'd say that this play wasn't about anything. You know, well, yes it was. It was about us. And the fact is that men sitting around talking seems to be a fascinating subject. And women sitting around talking makes them impatient. I don't want to just make like a wild generalization about it. It's just that things don't get better. So, back to Chicago in 1978, after I had been reviewing for longer than I should have been before I realized this, I went to a play in the theater that used to belong to David Mamet's company. It was about to belong to Steppenwolf. And there was this play by a woman named Wendy Wasserstein, and it was called Uncommon Women and Others. And I had never heard of her, and this was not even the off-Broadway one with the famous people. This was a local production. And I remember sitting there and thinking, oh my God, I have never before been in a theater and seen a play in which people, that could be about people I know. That women, that our lives were actually dramatic material. And it was like one of those absolutely, you big dummy moments where I thought, I've been going to theater all this time and never knew it could be about me. It could be about people that I went to college with. Doesn't mean the play was better or worse. It just meant that theater could do something, that there was this whole world of life that was not being expressed on the stage. And I moved to New York in '80, you know, full of joy about all of this. When he was writing, and then I would write these stories. I was at USA Today for 1 year too long, and I would write these trend stories about, look at all the women who are writing now, and look at, here's Marcia Norman, and here's Beth Henley, and here's Wendy Wasserstein, and then I write, and here's Beth Henley, and here's Marcia Norman, and here's Wendy Wasserstein, and Marcia Norman. And they would all be saying, we don't want to be thought of as women playwrights. You know, we're playwrights. Don't write these stories that we're women playwrights. Don't put us in a ghetto in these stories, because that's going to hurt us. And maybe it did. I don't know, but all I know is that there, as Susan tells you from the statistics, things don't get better for women plays. I can tell you that things don't get better for newspapers. So if you think that somehow I can hire a woman critic, there aren't any critics going to be hired. This is an entirely other panel, except no, newspapers are over. Criticism is pretty much over. And certainly most papers do not want reviews of plays by unknown women in black boxes on 55th Street. You know, if you don't have a star in it, if you're not on Broadway, then it is very, very increasingly hard to get a review in the paper, even if you had all the women in town at all the papers. The web is opening up. There are lots of women writing on the web. The problem with the web is that nobody makes any money. And I think this is a profession, and I think that people ought to be paid for it. And if people are giving it away on the web, why should newspapers even, you know, pay my pension? So there's, how can I tell you, how do you get reviewed? Because I know this is not a bitch session, but a proactive session.